Hello, everybody, and welcome to season 6 of the Crypto Hipster podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, thought leaders, executives, entrepreneurs, artists, musicians, you name it, all around the world of crypto and blockchain. And today I have an amazing guest. It's actually two parts, first part of a two-part series, and I'm really excited about it. So I invite my audience to listen in, and my guest is the Director of Communications at Rarify Labs. Her name is Kitty Horlick. Kitty, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Very welcome. Thank you for being here. So let's kick things off and ask you the first question is what is your background and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Yep, sure. So my background is I first got involved with Web3 or blockchain back in 2016, and I've worked mostly in comms and most frequently as a contractor, as a freelancer. So what happened is I was working on a lot of different projects on a lot of different chains, and I was sometimes working directly with blockchains themselves. So, for example, I did a lot of work with Cardano Foundation, and I was frequently hearing all these different arguments about what specific offering each chain had and why this chain was the best chain and all the different features it had. And I gradually started to realize that because of the different technical trade-offs between chains, no single chain could ever provide all of the infrastructure that Web3 needs. And I started to become really, really interested in interoperability and in multi-chain solutions. Um, and just for context, Rarimo, which is the protocol that Rarify Labs supports, is an interoperability protocol, specifically for digital social identities. And I think from the social identity side, I've always considered blockchain inherently social because of the transparency and the traceability and the fact that you can view the transactions that are happening and you have this visibility, even just to financial exchanges that hasn't really existed before. And so I was super excited when I started to realize that Web3 had hit this inflection point where you were getting super advanced types of social exchange take place. Like we're seeing this wave of decentralized social media, of on-chain gaming, of spaces where really complex relationships are unfolding. And I could kind of ramble about it all day. But just on the topic of background, I also think it's relevant to highlight the rest of the team's background, and how sort of particular it is, because our co-founder Lasha, who I know you're having on, has actually been in the digital identity space since 2013, when he worked with the Ukrainian government to digitize identity documents, and he's been in blockchain since 2015. So he's had like a long time to kind of ponder the merge of these two things, of identity and blockchain.
So what are Rarimo and Rarify Labs all about, including your role and focus?
Yeah, sure. So I am the communications director at Rarify Labs, and Rarify was set up specifically to support Rarimo. And Rarimo is an interoperability protocol that's focused on digital social identities. And when I think most people hear about digital identities, they immediately picture KYC credentials. And we definitely have a big focus on KYC, but we also work on a huge range of different types of digital identities, including much more kind of explicitly social identities. So, DAO membership might be a classic example. Your account on decentralized social media might be another example. Like there's a whole host of different kind of explicitly social identities arising. And when we say that we make them interoperable, we mean two things. So when we say we provide interoperability, we mean two things. So firstly, we allow off-chain data to move on-chain, which is really important for the digital identity space, because a lot of credentials are initially held off-chain, or a lot of the data around social identities is held off chain. And secondly, we allow any data that's on chain to become multi-chain and to move between different ecosystems. And we thought this was so important, again, for two reasons. And the first reason is that, you know, all of us want Web3 to have a great user experience and to be really seamless. And we're all kind of familiar with these like quite, you know, annoying, in my opinion, Web 2 practices where you have to endlessly enter the same information about yourself again and again into different sites or into different applications. You have to juggle like a million different logins. And what interoperability allows is for you to generate a single credential, like a single web, you know, on-chain credential, that might, for example, prove a specific thing about yourself, like that you're over 18. And you can then just use this credential seamlessly across like all the different dApps that you encounter. And it's just a much easier process. And then secondly, we think of interoperability and being able to port your identity from one platform or from one ecosystem to another as being a really, really critical part of ownership. So without the freedom to really move your identity from one place to another, I think it's questionable how much you really own that identity. And I think, again, you can kind of look towards Web 2 to illustrate this, you know. So like anyone who's used traditional social media will know that they don't truly own their account on that platform, you know, like you can't transport your account, you can't transport your followers, you can't transport any of the content you've produced on there. You're vulnerable to censorship, you're vulnerable to all sorts of unfavorable terms and conditions. You know, there's been so much data abuse, for example, in traditional social media. And you know, part of the reason that this happens is because like traditional platforms know that when users can't freely move everything that they've built up on that platform, they're kind of dependent on the platform, and it creates a bit of a power imbalance. So these platforms aren't really incentivized to offer favorable terms. And this is actually known as something called like the the attract extract dynamic, which is like when you first found a platform, like a social media platform that's dependent on network effect, you're incentivized to offer really, really attractive terms to users because you want all of them to join. And then once the network effect is so strong that people don't really have a choice to participate without being excluded from specific communities or without facing like a disadvantage in their work, you don't really have to like bother being so attractive anymore because they need you. And instead you can just start like extracting. And that's when you see things like, you know, low creator awards or like, you know, poor data ownership models and stuff like that. But if you can port and transfer your identity, and if you can port and transfer your social accounts and all of the data and the graphs connected to them, you reset this power balance between the platform and the user, and the platforms are much more incentivized to offer good terms, and the users have a great deal of freedom where they can leave if they don't like those terms. And this is kind of known as the walled garden issue. And because the social layer is so nascent and it's really only just like emerging, we really, really want to make sure that interoperability is like baked in from the start, and that you have you know, these portable practices, and that everything's multi-chain, because it's much harder to introduce it further down the line. And Rarimo is the only protocol that provides the infrastructure that allows these identities to become interoperable.
So I have a few follow-ups. That was excellent.
I said that so quickly, I didn't really breathe. I need to.
I'm going to give you a chance to breathe because I have like three follow-ups from what you just said there. Yeah, something surprised me.
Too fast, by the way.
No,
Or
you're good. You're good. You're good. I'm just trying to catch up to my follow-up questions here, and I had the first one's this. and it's something you said earlier, and I want to ask about bespoke solutions, but I want to get the lay of the field here first. Network effect. Um, something surprised me overnight yesterday. There was a famous influencer who was fired from his own brand. you know,
Wow.
his name BitBoy Crypto, and BitBoy Crypto is no longer BitBoy Crypto. He's no longer with the company. How do you like? I didn't think it was possible for somebody to be fired from his own brand, but how do you get that build back that network effect, like that once if you're on a certain platform and you've been and you can't move that fast and you have that walled garden, how do you build back that network effect, to move from say Twitter X to maybe Instagram to maybe Facebook to maybe somewhere else? Like, what is the challenge in being able to navigate that network effect and that power balance?
Yeah, I mean, so that's interesting. I hadn't seen this like specific case that you're talking about with the BitBoy effect, but these sorts of stories of people losing access to their networks of the community or their communities or the accounts through which they connect with those communities is relatively common in Web 2, and how that sort of instance would be mediated in Web 3 is that it's not just that they have ownership over their kind of digital identity per se, they would also own what we call the social graph, which is the underlying network of all the different interactions that they've had with other people. And they can port that social graph. So the way that they're communicating with their followers isn't filtered just through one platform in the way that it kind of forcibly is in Web 2.
Got it. So what you're saying is that it requires bespoke solutions. So, what are bespoke solutions, and why do some of the custom artifacts composing digital identities require bespoke solutions?
Yeah, okay, so this is a great question. Because it just highlights how special Rarimo is. So interoperability and portability, like as a concept, has been around for quite a long time in Web3. So there's already a lot of bridging solutions for cryptocurrencies and financial assets. And how these bridging solutions work is like quite straightforward. Like you basically lock a token somewhere and then you mint it on the new chain. Um, and the reason it's so straightforward, or the reason that such straightforward solutions work, is because cryptocurrencies are interchangeable. Like it doesn't matter to the user which Bitcoin they have as long as like they have a Bitcoin. But with digital identities, the very specific information that the identity refers to is all important, and identities aren't interchangeable. So, and they also fluctuate. So, when you're transferring them, you need to ensure that you're bringing a huge you need to ensure that you're bringing access to that information with you. So, take for example NFTs. NFTs are used a lot in the digital identity space, particularly when you're doing reputation building. And they're super dynamic, like the metadata can change. So, when you're transferring an NFT, you want to make sure that you're making all of that metadata retrievable so that you keep the history and the provenance available. And NFTs are just one of many different types of artifacts that are used in digital identities. You have so many different types, and you need to be able to support all of them. But another really big difference between digital identities and other digital assets is that the information contained in digital identities is highly sensitive and it's private. So you really need privacy to be embedded in the interoperability solutions. And this means usually, or like the best way to preserve privacy is to ensure that you have zero knowledge capabilities. And traditional interoperability solutions don't offer this, and Rarimo does. And it's one of the reasons that were so unique, and it's partly how we provide these bespoke solutions.
Zero knowledge proofs. So I've interviewed a bunch of technical people, and they've explained to me zero knowledge proofs at the technical, difficult level to understand. You know, um, I'm interested to hear from you. What a zero knowledge proof is. And then how Rarimo implements them to protect digital identities.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I couldn't help but laugh when you said that because they're so complicated cryptographically. They can be really hard to understand. But just simply put, a zero knowledge proof enables one party to prove to another party that a certain statement is true without revealing any additional information. So, an example of this might be you could prove that you're over 18 without revealing the exact date of your birth. So you still keep quite a lot of information private. And as I was saying before, zero knowledge cryptography is so critical to digital identities because you don't want to share a lot of the information that you might be using to identify yourself online, or you might not want to share all of the information that is available about yourself, like in a particular credential. Um, and one example of how Rarimo has leveraged ZK proofs is through our Proof of Humanity plugin. And Proof of Humanity is like a pretty exciting innovation. So I might just zoom out for a moment to explain exactly what a Proof of Humanity is, so that the role of the ZKs makes sense. But Proof of Humanities, which are also sometimes referred to as proofs of personhood, um, are basically solutions that allow users to prove that they are humans instead of bots. And that might sound like a bit strange, like, why do you need to prove that you're human? But frequently online spaces, including Web3, are now so overrun with bots that can be really difficult to distinguish like who's a human and who's a bot. And this is going to get worse with AI. And so increasingly we need a way to distinguish like the people from the machines. And Vitalik actually recently published a blog where he called proof of humanity solutions as one of the most valuable tools that the Ethereum community is trying to build. So even though it's simple, it's a really, really useful piece of infrastructure. And there are a lot of ways that a user might want to prove that they're human, or there's a lot of different ways that solutions allow users to do that. So kind of most topically or most famously, there's WorldCoin, which uses biometric solutions. So they have these kind of really futuristic looking pieces of very specialized hardware called orbs that scan your iris and then generate proofs that show that, like, the user has a unique iris and therefore must be human. But you could also use social graphs or like specific KYC credentials to prove that a user must be human or has performed social activities that only a human can perform. So, for example, one of the identity providers that Rarimo worked with or partnered with in our Proof of Humanity solution was Unstoppable Domains. And we kind of went on the assumption that if someone has an unstoppable domain, they've had to go through so many steps to get that domain, including like having a bank account and purchasing the domain, that they couldn't possibly be a bot and they must be a human. So yeah, you have all these different identity providers and different proof of humanity solutions. And what Rarimo did is we aggregated them all into one single plugin so that a DApp could integrate with Rarimo and then like instantly get access to all these different proof of humanity solutions and all these different providers. And we thought that that was such an important thing to do because if you don't have optionality within proof of humanity, you end up with a situation where users might find that they're kind of forced to participate in one verification method or risk being excluded from a space. So if like everywhere you go suddenly demands like that you use a WorldCoin proof of humanity, then users will find that they kind of have no choice but to start using to start generating WorldCoin proofs of humanity. Yeah, we wanted to ensure that users basically like have options and don't feel like they're forced to use like a specific verification process. And we also wanted the dApps to have optionality and not feel like they have to go with one or the other. Um, and with this solution where we introduced ZK proofs is that like whenever a user generates a proof using the Rarimo solution, yeah, so we wanted to make sure basically that users had choice and that like they had options about which identity provider they use and which form of verification they went for and whether or not they wanted to do biometric or social graph or whatever. And where ZKs come in is that we wanted to make sure that when you're proving you're human, that's the only information that you give away about yourself and that no other extra details are revealed. So to go back to the unstoppable domains example, not even the domain that you own would be revealed. Like the proof protects all this additional information and you're able to preserve your privacy as you move about the net. Because this was always the biggest challenge with proof of humanity solutions. It's like, how do you make someone prove that they're a human? Or like, how do you allow someone to prove that they're a human without making them hand over loads and loads of personal data and loads of personal information? So hopefully that sort of explains how a ZK works and like what it does in practice.
It does. Thank you. That was great. And made me think about a few things. You mentioned WorldCoin, and I'm like, I looked at the investors behind it, like the 3AC guys and Sam Bankman-Fried, and I'm like, it made me think, there needs to be another step in addition to just, proof of humanity, proof of motive, you know, is important too. And we don't see that right now. But, no one can see the proof of motive, which means there are some dangers behind, artificial intelligence or the use of these bots or, whatever, in addition to maybe having an improper motive, what are the dangers of this AI and this bots and what should people look out for? You know?
Yeah. Well, I think bots have been a kind of threat to the security of online spaces for a long time. And I think the thing that's interesting about bots and kind of distinguishes them from, I don't know, like the traditional scammer is it's more that they can like overwhelm entire systems and they can flood platforms and they can like oversaturate spaces and fill it with so much content that it makes it very, very difficult to like shift through it and find um authentic content or to realize like what's true and what's not. So a kind of classic example that I often think about with bots was all the speculation around the 2016 election when there were accusations that Russia mobilized bots to flood Twitter with like pro-Trump content and warp the results. And it was never proven whether or not that actually happened. And there was a lot of kind of speculation about it, but it just illustrated how bots might function if they were being used, or of how you could intervene with a democratic process if you wanted to using bots. And I think it's like a very vivid example for this kind of oversaturation argument. And with AI, not only is it much easier to generate bots, it's also much easier to just generate vast amounts of content and often, content that's very misleading or could like spread disinformation. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to tell which content is authentic and which content has been machine generated. So one case that I saw recently was, an artificial image of the Pentagon exploding, that circulated and went viral, and it was even reshared by specific news sources. And it actually caused the S&P to drop by, I think it was 0.2%, which isn't huge, but again, it's like indicative of how convincing and powerful this AI content, artificially generated content, can be, that it actually influences like the movement of a market. So I think like increasingly we need to focus on identifying the provenance of content and the provenance of images, and being able to tell, like, did a human generate this or did a bot generate this? And you can use, there's a lot of cryptography that's like been born out of Web3 and blockchain that could be really, really useful for this. And in general, like, if AI makes the internet a less trustworthy place, you can see blockchain as making it a more trustworthy place, because blockchain can act as a singular source of truth, and it can provide traceability, it can provide transparency, it can drastically improve provenance. So I think like, as well as being cautious about bots, I think there's also a lot, and cautious of AI, I think there's also like a lot to be hopeful for, and quite a lot of amazing solutions being innovated at the moment.
Interesting. You said early on that there are groups on socials that are the one chain is the only chain or the best chain, and no other chains are. And I've run into several in the,
Yeah.
like Bitcoiners or Ethereans or whatever, who don't even give me the time of day because I cover every chain, you know? And I'm like, and then looking at their followers, like 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. I'm like, does anybody actually know these people? How many people actually know in their work? You're like, how do we? And I believe blockchain is a single source of truth too, and I believe that can make a difference. But how do we deal with, in the current lay of the land? How do we deal with those fake hoods or whatever, those bots? Minimize the threat. Has a common layperson look through that and navigate the creator economy so that they can see what's genuine versus what's fake?
Yeah, well, I think you've touched on a really big problem. Like, it's very, very difficult to ascertain sentiment online anymore, and to tell whether or not the amount of likes and the level of engagement that a content creator appears to have is authentic, or whether it's just bots. And hopefully things like the proof of humanity solution can improve this, because what it does is it puts up a barrier where people can only engage with specific spaces on specific platforms, like if they prove first that they're a human. So if it's like a load of artificial bots, they're not going to be able to go and drive up that fake sentiment. But I think there's also a lot of really interesting stuff. There's a lot of interesting ways that blockchain can kind of protect creator authenticity, so to speak. So we spoke, in the last question just now, about being able to trace the provenance of images. And I think this will also help with clarifying followers and sentiments, like when you can trace where an image came from, or when you can prove that like a human made it, and you can really provide like a lot of detail and background around some of the stuff that's been shared. I think that will also help streamline the engagement that it gets.
Got it. I'm looking forward to that. By the way,
Yeah,
um,
me too.
awesome. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been a very enjoyable conversation for me. And I think my last question is going to be easy. It's how can people find out more information about you, about Rarify, Rarimo? How can they sign up for the Proof for Humanity, or get involved with it? How can they do any of that?
Yep. So the best way to stay in touch or stay up to date with what Rarimo is up to is just to follow us on Twitter. But we also have a Medium that has some blogs that detail these topics in a bit more detail. And we do have a Discord and Telegram. And if you want to use the Proof of Humanity solution as a user, we've integrated it. We launched it with 2 platforms, which was Decentraland through the DCL curations, which is an educational experience where you can complete different quizzes and exercises and you get rewards and rareables. Or you could go to Galaxy because we've integrated it there. And I think at the moment it's only been implemented on the Rarimo Quest. But you could check it out that way. And then if you're a DApp or a platform and you're interested in integrating the Proof of Humanity solution, you could get in touch with us on our Telegram. We have like a specific channel to help businesses actually integrate the solution, or reach out to us on Twitter or whatever.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much.